The letter that changed Clara Whitcomb's life was not addressed to her. It was folded inside a newspaper left behind on a boarding house table in St. Louis, Missouri, in the spring of 1882. The paper had been handled by too many hands, its edges soft, its ink smudged from rain and coffee stains. Clara had only picked it up because the dining room was empty, the clock was ticking too loudly, and loneliness had a way of making even old news feel like company. She was 28 years old, though most women in the boarding house acted as if that made her nearly finished with hope. Clara did not feel finished. She felt tired. For 12 years, she had earned her bread with a needle and thread. She mended torn sleeves for traveling salesmen, hemmed dresses for rich women who never remembered her name, stitched mourning gowns for widows, and sometimes worked so late by lamplight that her fingers went stiff before morning. Her room was small, her bed narrow, her trunk half empty. A faded photograph of her mother sat on the windowsill. Beside it lay a pair of silver sewing scissors, the only fine thing Clara owned. She had learned early that life did not wait for a woman to be ready. Her mother had died when Clara was 16. Her father had remarried within a year. His new wife had never been cruel in a loud way. She had simply moved Clara's chair farther from the table, gave her smaller portions, and spoke of grown girls making their own way, until Clara understood the message. Clara left. She never begged to return. That was the thing about Clara Whitcomb. She could be hurt, but she would not crawl. That rainy morning, she turned the newspaper page and found the notice in a narrow column near the back. Rancher 36, Dakota Territory. Owns cattle land and a sound house near Cedar Ridge. Seeks wife of honest heart, steady hands, and plain speech. Beauty not required, sweet lies not wanted. Write only if truth means something to you. Nathaniel Reed, Red Creek Ranch. Clara read it once, then again, then a third time slower. Beauty not required, sweet lies not wanted. Those words reached into her chest with a quiet strength. Most notices in the paper sounded like men shopping for a servant with a pretty face. This one felt different. It did not promise riches. It did not beg for charm. It asked for truth, as if the man who wrote it had been wounded by the opposite. Clara set the paper down. Outside, rain tapped the glass. In the hall, Mrs. Bellamy, the boarding house keeper, laughed with one of the younger girls. The girl was 19, soft-voiced, and newly engaged to a clerk with polished boots. Clara listened for a moment, then looked at her own hands. They were good hands, strong hands, hands that had kept her alive. That evening after supper, Clara sat at her little desk and wrote to a stranger. She did not decorate herself with pretty claims. She did not call herself cheerful, delicate, or graceful. She wrote that she was 28, a seamstress, used to hard work and not afraid of plain living. She wrote that she had no family waiting for her, no dowry, no grand beauty, and no patience for false promises. Then she paused, her pen hovering over the page. At last, she added one final line. I would rather be unwanted for the truth than chosen for a lie. Her hand trembled after she wrote it, not because she regretted it, because it was the most honest thing she had ever put on paper. The next morning, she walked to the post office before she could lose courage. The streets smelled of wet wood, horse mud, and coal smoke. Her boots took in water at the seams, but she kept walking. When the clerk took the letter, Clara almost asked for it back. Instead, she turned away. For the next 2 weeks, she told herself she had been foolish. A woman did not answer a mail-order bride notice because 7 lines in a newspaper stirred something lonely inside her. A woman did not imagine a whole life from the shape of a stranger's words. But every morning when Mrs. Bellamy sorted the post, Clara's heart betrayed her. On the 15th day, a letter came. The handwriting was firm, dark, and careful. Miss Whitcomb. I read your letter 3 times before I knew how to answer it. Not because I doubted you, but because I believed you. That is rarer than it ought to be. My name is Nathaniel Reed. I am not a polished man. My house is clean but quiet. My land is honest but hard. Winter here can make a person feel small, and the wind speaks through every crack in the walls if a man has not sealed them right. I have known loss. I have known silence. I have known the shame of sitting at a table built for more than one person and eating alone for so many nights that loneliness begins to feel like furniture. I do not need a woman to decorate my life. I would like one to share it. If you choose to write again, write as you did before, plainly. Clara held the letter for a long while after reading it. Something inside her, something she had kept folded away for years, stirred open. She wrote back that night, and so it began. For 3 months, their letters crossed miles of rivers, plains, smoke, and dust. Clara learned that Nathaniel had lost his younger brother in a cattle crossing accident years before, and afterward had become the kind of man who spoke less because grief had taught him the cost of words. She learned he had a bay horse named Mercy, a stubborn milk cow, and an old hound named Judge who slept by the stove but growled at thunder. Nathaniel learned Clara hated being pitied, loved strong coffee, feared wasting her life more than she feared hardship, and kept her mother's photograph near her bed because it reminded her that gentleness could survive in a hard world. Their letters did not sound romantic. That was why they became something deeper. One evening in July, Clara received the letter that made her sit down before her knees failed her. Miss Whitcomb, I will not pretend this is simple. You would be leaving everything known for a man you have only met through ink. That is no small thing, but I have come to wait for your letters like a man waits for rain after drought. If you are willing, come west. I will meet the train in Cedar Ridge on the first Tuesday of August. If you step off that train and decide I am not the man you hoped for, I will pay your way back east without anger. But if you stay, I swear before God and open sky, I will never ask you to become less than the truth you sent me. Nathaniel Reed. Clara read the letter twice. Then she pressed it against her chest. By morning, she had made her decision. She sold what little she could. She gave away what she could not carry. She packed 2 dresses, her sewing kit, her mother's photograph, a Bible with loose pages, and every letter Nathaniel had sent her, tied with a strip of blue cloth from an old dress. Mrs. Bellamy stood in the doorway as Clara closed her trunk. You may come crawling back before winter, the woman said, not cruelly but not kindly either. Clara lifted her chin. Maybe, she said, but at least I will know I tried to walk toward something. The train left St. Louis under a pale morning sky. Clara sat by the window with her gloved hands folded tightly in her lap. The city slipped away behind her. Brick buildings gave way to fields. Fields widened into land that seemed to have no end. With every mile, fear rose higher in her throat. He could be false. The ranch could be nothing. His kindness could live only on paper. And worst of all, she could arrive, look into his face, and feel the terrible emptiness of a mistake. But Clara stayed in her seat, because courage was not the absence of fear. It was carrying fear west with both hands and not turning back. On the 3rd evening, as the train thundered toward Dakota Territory, Clara untied the blue cloth and read Nathaniel's first letter again. I do not need a woman to decorate my life. I would like one to share it. Outside the window, the sky burned gold over the endless prairie, and somewhere beyond that light, a lonely rancher was waiting at a station, holding his hat in his hands, wondering if the woman who had written the truth would truly step off the train. Cedar Ridge Station was little more than a wooden platform, a freight shed, and a water tower leaning against the wide Dakota sky. When Clara stepped down from the train, she felt the wind before she saw the town. It moved across the platform with a bold, open force, tugging at her bonnet ribbons and pressing her skirt against her legs. It smelled of dust, dry grass, coal smoke, and something sharp she could not name. She held her small valise in one hand and looked over the faces waiting near the platform. A mother with 2 children, a gray-bearded man chewing tobacco, a freight clerk counting crates, and then she saw him. Nathaniel Reed stood beside a wagon near the far end of the station, holding his hat in both hands. He was taller than she had imagined, broad-shouldered, sun-browned, with dark hair touched lightly at the temples and eyes the color of weathered blue glass. He did not smile right away. He only looked at her as if he was afraid one quick movement might make the moment break. Clara knew him before he spoke, not from his face, from the stillness. The letters had been full of that same quiet care. "Miss Whitcomb?" he asked. His voice was lower than she expected. "Mr. Reed," she said. For a moment neither of them moved. The train hissed behind her. A porter dropped a trunk with a hard thud. Somewhere near the freight shed a dog barked once and stopped. Nathaniel glanced at her valise, then at the trunk being unloaded. "You made the journey," he said. "I said I would." His mouth moved, almost a smile but not quite. "Yes," he said softly, "you did." He picked up her trunk without making a show of it and carried it to the wagon. Clara walked beside him, aware of every step, every breath, every inch of space between them. She had crossed half the country for this man, yet she did not know how close to stand. The wagon was plain but sturdy. 2 brown horses waited in the traces, flicking their ears at the train noise. Nathaniel helped her up with a careful hand. His palm was rough, warm, and gone almost as soon as she felt it. "I need to tell you something before we leave town," he said, climbing onto the seat beside her. Clara's stomach tightened. "All right." He looked toward the dusty street beyond the station. "Folks here know why you came." She looked at him. "I did not announce it," he added quickly. "But a town like Cedar Ridge does not need much help making stories. The postmaster talks. The station agent guesses. Mrs. Vale at the Mercantile sees everything and forgives nothing." Clara looked out at the small row of buildings. A general store, a blacksmith, a church with peeling white paint, a hotel, and a sheriff's office with 1 chair outside. Several people were already pretending not to stare. "I have lived with people talking before," Clara said. Nathaniel turned to her then, and something like respect moved through his eyes. "I believe you have." He clicked his tongue to the horses, and the wagon rolled away from the station. Cedar Ridge passed slowly. Men paused outside the blacksmith shop. A woman holding a basket looked Clara up and down. 2 boys ran along the boardwalk until an older man snapped at them to stop gawking. Clara kept her hands folded in her lap and her back straight. Nathaniel noticed. "They will tire of it," he said. "No, they will not," Clara replied, "but they may grow better at hiding it." This time Nathaniel did smile. It was small, but it changed his whole face. The town fell behind them and the road opened into prairie. Clara had seen wide land from the train window, but this was different. There was no glass between her and the world now. The sky seemed too large for any one person to stand beneath. Grass rolled in pale waves on both sides of the road. Far off, a hawk circled above a low ridge. For a long while they rode in silence. It was not unpleasant. Still, Clara felt the weight of what had not been said. She had come west as a promised bride, yet no vows had been spoken. No ring waited on her finger. The man beside her was both stranger and almost known. At last Nathaniel cleared his throat. "The ranch is 12 miles out. House is smaller than it sounded in my letters." "You said it was plain." "It is plainer in person." "I have lived in rented rooms with walls thin enough to hear other people dream," Clara said. "Plain does not frighten me." He nodded once. They rode another mile. Then he said, "Judge may frighten you. The hound. He thinks thunder is an enemy and strangers are tax collectors. I have met worse." Nathaniel looked at her from the corner of his eye. "I expect you have." By late afternoon, the land dipped into a shallow valley. Clara saw the ranch for the first time. Red Creek Ranch sat beneath a long sweep of sky, surrounded by fence lines, cattle pens, a small barn, and a windmill that creaked in the steady breeze. The house was made of weathered boards with a low porch and smoke rising from the chimney. It was not beautiful in the polished way of Eastern homes, but it stood firm. Something about that mattered to Clara. As the wagon rolled into the yard, a deep bark came from the porch. An old hound stood there, gray around the muzzle, one ear bent, his body stiff with suspicion. Nathaniel climbed down. "Judge, mind yourself." The dog ignored him completely and stared at Clara. Clara stepped down slowly. She did not reach for him. She did not speak in a sweet, false voice. She simply stood still and let the animal decide. Judge took 3 slow steps forward. He sniffed her skirt, then her glove. Then, with great dignity, he turned his back and walked toward the door as if she had passed some test he did not care to explain. Nathaniel watched with surprise. He does not usually allow that so fast." "Maybe he read my letters too," Clara said. Nathaniel laughed. It was sudden, quiet, and real. The sound warmed something in her chest. Inside, the house smelled of coffee, wood smoke, leather, and clean floorboards. The kitchen was simple. A table, 4 chairs, iron stove, shelves lined with tin plates, and a blue cup with a crack along one side. The main room held a fireplace, a bookcase with more dust than books, and a chair that looked used to being occupied by a man who sat alone at night. Clara saw the loneliness in that chair. She did not say so. Nathaniel carried her trunk to the small spare room at the back of the house. It had a narrow bed, a quilt folded at the foot, a washstand, and a window looking toward the barn. "I thought you would want your own room until things are settled," he said from the doorway. Clara turned. There it was again. Truth, not pressure, not claim, not ownership, just room to breathe. "Thank you," she said. He nodded but did not leave right away. "There is one more thing," he said. Clara waited. His hand tightened on the doorframe. "I should have told you in a letter. I nearly did more than once." A cold thread moved through her. Nathaniel looked down the hall toward the kitchen, where Judge's claws clicked across the floor. "There was a woman before," he said quietly. "Not a wife, almost. Her name was Abigail. She came west 3 years ago to marry me." Clara's fingers curled around the edge of the washstand. "She left?" Clara asked. His jaw tightened. "No," he said. "She died before the wedding." The room seemed to grow still. Nathaniel looked at Clara then, and the pain in his face was old but not dead. "Some folks in town think I should have put that in the notice. Some think I had no right to ask another woman here at all." Clara did not know what to say. She had imagined many dangers on the train west: a false man, a ruined ranch, a cruel temper, a hidden debt. She had not imagined arriving to find a ghost already living in the house. Nathaniel stepped back from the doorway. "I will understand if this changes things," he said. "I meant what I wrote. If you want to go back, I will pay your fare." Clara looked past him toward the kitchen, toward the plain table, the worn chair, the old hound lying near the stove. Then she looked back at Nathaniel Reed. "I did not come this far to be frightened by the truth," she said. His face changed, but before he could answer, a sharp sound cracked through the yard outside. A horse screamed. Nathaniel turned fast. Clara followed him to the porch just as one of the ranch hands came running from the barn, waving his hat in panic. "Mr. Reed," the young man shouted. "The south gate is open. Half the cattle are pushing toward the ravine." Nathaniel grabbed his hat. Clara stood in the doorway, the prairie wind lifting loose strands of her hair. Her first evening at Red Creek Ranch had barely begun, and already the land was testing whether she truly belonged there. Nathaniel was off the porch before Clara could draw a full breath. His boots hit the dirt hard, and the calm man from the train station disappeared under the weight of urgent work. He ran toward the barn while the young ranch hand, a red-haired boy named Caleb, pointed wildly toward the south pasture. "The latch was cut," Caleb shouted. "It didn't break, somebody cut it clean." Nathaniel stopped for half a second. Clara saw the change in his shoulders, not fear, understanding. Then he moved faster. "Get Mercy saddled," he ordered. "Take the east line and turn them from the creek bed." "I'll ride south." Caleb vanished into the barn. Clara stepped off the porch. "What can I do?" Nathaniel turned as if he had forgotten she was there, then looked at her dress, her travel-worn gloves, her city boots with mud still dried on the seams. "Stay near the house," he said. "It may not be safe." Clara's chin lifted. Do cattle listen better when only men speak to them? For one quick moment, even in the danger, something like surprise crossed his face. Then a corner of his mouth tightened, almost against his will. "Can you ride?" "Yes." "How well?" "Well enough not to fall off just because the ground moves." That was all he needed. He pointed to the barn. "There's a gray mare in the left stall. Her name is Sunday. She's steady if you don't pull her mouth. Keep wide. Do not get between the herd and the ravine." Clara nodded and gathered her skirt enough to move fast. Inside the barn, the air smelled of hay, dust, and warm animals. Sunday watched her with one dark eye, calm as a church bell. Clara had not ridden much since girlhood, but muscle and memory came back faster than courage. She tightened the cinch with trembling hands and led the mare into the yard. Nathaniel was already mounted on Mercy, a strong bay horse with a white blaze. He looked once at Clara, then toward the south pasture where a low cloud of dust rose against the orange sky. "Stay to my left," he called. They rode. The prairie that had seemed so quiet an hour ago now felt alive with danger. The wind tore at Clara's bonnet. The ground rolled under Sunday's hooves. Ahead, cattle bawled and shoved in a dark moving mass toward a break in the land where the ravine cut deep through the pasture. Clara's heart beat so hard she could feel it in her teeth. Nathaniel rode like a man born in the saddle. He leaned low, turned Mercy sharp, and sent his voice across the pasture with calm force. Caleb came from the east, waving his hat. Together, the two men tried to bend the herd away from the drop, but the cattle were frightened. Something had spooked them worse than an open gate. Clara saw it then, a strip of red cloth tied to a fence post, snapping in the wind. It cracked and fluttered like flame. Sunday tossed her head. Clara steadied the reins and pushed forward. A calf broke from the herd and ran straight toward the ravine. Without thinking, Clara turned Sunday hard left and cut across its path. The mare responded quicker than Clara expected. Dirt flew. The calf bawled, swerved, and stumbled back toward the herd. "Clara!" Nathaniel shouted. She could not tell if it was warning or praise. She did not have time to wonder. Another steer turned wild-eyed toward the open land. Clara waved one arm and cried out, her voice breaking in the wind. Sunday held her ground. The steer slowed, then turned with the others. Bit by bit, the herd bent away from the ravine. By the time the sun dropped low, the worst had passed. The cattle spread into safer ground, nervous but alive. Caleb rode the fence line, counting. Nathaniel dismounted near the cut gate and knelt in the dirt. Clara rode up slowly. The gate rope lay on the ground, sliced through with a sharp blade. Nathaniel picked it up. His face was hard now. "This was no accident," Clara said. "No." "Who would do this?" He did not answer at once. The wind moved through the grass. Far away, a meadowlark sang as if nothing had happened. At last, Nathaniel stood. A man who thinks Red Creek should have been his. Clara waited. Nathaniel looked toward the distant road leading back to Cedar Ridge. "Sela's Crow," he said. "He owns the spread west of here. Wanted this valley for years. Tried to buy it from my father. Tried to buy it from me. When I said no, trouble began coming in small pieces." "What kind of trouble?" "Fence down, salt sacks ruined, a well rope cut, 2 calves missing last fall. And the town knows." "The town knows what it can prove," he said, "which is nothing." Clara looked at the sliced rope in his hand. A hard, cold anger rose in her, not loud but steady. She had known men like that in the city, men who smiled while pushing others toward the edge, men who called greed ambition and cruelty business. Nathaniel looked at her then. "You should not have had to see this your first day." "But I did. I meant to give you supper, a quiet evening, time to settle." Clara looked across the pasture at Caleb, at the tired horses, at the cattle still shifting in the dusk. "You gave me the truth," she said. "That was the bargain, was it not?" For a moment Nathaniel seemed unable to speak. Then Judge barked from the direction of the house, deep and angry. Both of them turned. A rider sat on the road near the front gate. He was too far away to see clearly, but he sat easy in the saddle, watching the ranch as if it already belonged to him. Nathaniel's hand tightened around the cut rope. "Crow," he said. The rider lifted one hand in a slow, mocking greeting. Then he turned his horse and rode away. That night, supper was late and quiet. Clara sat at the kitchen table with dust on her hem and a scratch across one glove. Nathaniel poured coffee with hands that looked steady, though she noticed the small tightness in his fingers. Caleb ate fast, still shaken, and excused himself to sleep in the bunkhouse. Judge lay near the stove with his head on his paws, but his eyes stayed open. The house no longer felt lonely to Clara. It felt watched. After the dishes were washed, Nathaniel stood by the kitchen window, looking out at the dark yard. You helped save more cattle than I care to count, he said. I helped a little. You helped enough. Clara dried the last plate and set it on the shelf. You do not like owing people. He looked back at her. No. Neither do I. That faint smile returned for a second, tired but real, then it faded. I need to say something and you may not like it, he said. Clara folded the dish towel carefully. Say it plainly. Crow will notice you. He notices anything that matters to a man. The words landed softly, but Clara felt their weight. Nathaniel looked ashamed of having to say them. I do not mean to frighten you, he continued. But a woman arriving here gives him something to talk about, something to twist. He may come at you with charm first, then insult, then lies. Clara walked to the table and touched the bundle of letters she had set there earlier. I have lived under whispers before. This is different. Maybe, she said, but I am not as breakable as people assume. Nathaniel lowered his eyes. I am beginning to understand that. The room grew quiet. A lantern flickered on the table, throwing gold over the blue cloth around his letters. Clara noticed Nathaniel looking at the bundle. You kept them with you? He asked. Yes. All of them? Yes. His face softened in a way she had not seen before. I kept yours too, he said. Clara looked up. In the desk, he added. I did not know if that would seem foolish. No, she said quietly, it seems human. For the first time since she had arrived, the silence between them changed. It was no longer careful. It was warmer, deeper, carrying all the words they were not ready to say. If this moment touched your heart, stay with the story, because Clara had only just reached Red Creek Ranch, and the truth waiting in that house was far from over. Later, when Clara went to her room, she found a folded quilt at the foot of her bed that had not been there before. It was faded blue and white, worn soft from years of use. Nathaniel stood in the hall, his hand resting on the doorframe. My mother made it, he said. I thought the nights might feel cold. Clara touched the quilt, a mother's stitches. A lonely house, a man who did not know how to offer tenderness without making it practical. Thank you, she said. He nodded and started to leave. Nathaniel, she called softly. He stopped. Who was Abigail? The question changed the air. His back remained turned for a moment. Then he faced her and the shadow in his eyes returned. She was the woman I failed to save, he said. Before Clara could ask anything more, a sound came from outside, not thunder, not wind. 3 slow knocks against the front door. The knocks came again. 3 slow sounds against the front door. Nathaniel moved first. He crossed the hall without a word, took the lantern from the kitchen table, and lifted it high enough for the light to reach the window. Judge rose from beside the stove, his old body stiff, his lips pulling back in a low growl. Clara stepped into the hall behind Nathaniel. Stay back, he said quietly. She did not argue, but she did not return to her room either. Nathaniel opened the door only halfway. A man stood on the porch with rain dusting the shoulders of his dark coat, though no rain had touched the ranch yard yet. He was tall, narrow-faced, and carefully dressed for a place where careful dressing usually meant a man wanted to be noticed. His black hat sat low over sharp eyes. A silver watch chain crossed his vest. He smiled like a knife pretending to be a spoon. Nathaniel, he said, heard you had some trouble with your cattle. Nathaniel's hand tightened on the door. Evening Crow. So this was Sela's crow. Clara felt it before she understood it. Some men brought cold into a room without opening a window. Crow's gaze slid past Nathaniel and found her standing in the hall. Well now, he said softly, the bride from the east. Nathaniel shifted, blocking more of the doorway. She is a guest in my house. Crow's smile widened. Only a guest. Folks in Cedar Ridge are already telling a sweeter story than that. Clara stepped forward before Nathaniel could answer. My name is Clara Whitcomb, she said, and I prefer people not speak about me as if I were a package dropped at the station. Crow's eyes sharpened with interest. A woman with a tongue. A man with ears should make use of them. For one moment the porch went silent, then Crow laughed. Nathaniel did not. Crow took off his hat and held it to his chest in a show of manners that did not reach his face. "No offense meant, Miss Whitcomb. I only came by to offer neighborly concern." "The gate rope was cut," Nathaniel said, "so I heard. Fast news travels to your place." Crow looked toward the dark pasture. News travels where men have reason to listen. Judge growled louder. Crow glanced down at the dog, still keeping that old hound alive. Nathaniel's voice lowered. "Say what you came to say." Crow's smile faded just enough to show what lived beneath it. "Trouble follows land like yours, Reed. A man alone can lose more than cattle. A man with a woman in his house can lose his name too." Clara saw Nathaniel's jaw harden. Crow put his hat back on. "Cedar Ridge remembers Abigail," he said. The name struck Nathaniel like a blow he refused to show. Clara's fingers curled at her sides. Crow looked at her again. "You may want to ask why the last woman never made it to the altar." Nathaniel stepped onto the porch. "That is enough." Crow held up both hands, still smiling. "Truth matters, does it not? That is what your notice said." Clara felt the hallway tilt around those words. Crow tipped his hat to her. "Good night, Miss Whitcomb. Sleep lightly. This prairie keeps old secrets poorly." Then he turned and walked down the steps into the dark. Nathaniel stood in the doorway until the sound of Crow's horse faded. Only then did he shut the door. The house felt smaller after that. Judge kept growling even after the porch was empty. Clara looked at Nathaniel. What did he mean? Nathaniel set the lantern down. The flame shook, though his hand did not seem to. He meant to poison the room. He knew exactly where to strike. "Yes." "Then tell me the truth before his version grows teeth." Nathaniel looked at her for a long moment. There was pain in his eyes, but also something else. Fear, not fear of Crow, fear that Clara would hear what happened and step away from him. At last he walked into the kitchen and pulled out a chair. Clara sat across from him. The lantern burned between them. "Abigail Stone came here from Illinois," Nathaniel began. 3 years ago, not through a notice. Her uncle knew my father. There was talk of marriage, not forced, not arranged exactly. Just two lonely people being pointed in the same direction." Clara listened without moving. "She was kind," he said. "Gentle, too gentle for this place, though I did not see that soon enough. I thought kindness and weakness were the same as everyone else did. I was wrong." His eyes moved to the window. Crow wanted this land even then. Abigail heard things in town, saw him meeting with a survey man. She tried to warn me. I told her not to trouble herself with ranch matters. The shame in his voice was quiet but deep. "A week before the wedding, she rode out to bring me a note from town. Storm came in hard. Her horse was found near the creek crossing." Clara's breath caught. Nathaniel swallowed. "They found Abigail the next morning. The creek had risen. There was no mark that proved anything but weather and bad luck." "But you do not believe it was only that?" "No," he said, "because the note she carried was gone. And 2 days later, Crow filed a claim saying part of my south pasture belonged to him." The room seemed to darken around the lantern. "Did anyone believe you?" "Some did in whispers, none did in court." Clara looked down at her hands. A dead woman, a missing note, a greedy neighbor, a town that looked away. Now Clara understood the ghost in the house. It was not only grief. It was unfinished truth. Nathaniel leaned back in his chair, tired suddenly in a way that made him seem older. "I should have told you before you came." "Yes," Clara said. He flinched, but she continued. "But I understand why you did not." His eyes lifted. "I would not have refused the truth," she said, "but I might have feared the shadow around it. I was afraid of that. And now I am afraid you will stay and be harmed because of me." Clara looked at him steadily. "Nathaniel, I have spent most of my life being moved by other people's decisions. My father's, his wife's, employers, landladies. Women who smiled while reminding me I had no husband, no house, no place of my own. Her voice softened but did not weaken. "I came here by choice. Do not take that from me by calling it protection." Nathaniel's expression shifted. For the first time, he looked not like a man trying to guard a woman from danger, but like a man realizing she had brought her own strength with her. Before he could answer, Judge barked once and moved toward the door. This time no knock followed, only the wind. Nathaniel stood and lifted the lantern again. Clara followed him to the front window. Outside, near the porch rail, something pale fluttered against the post. A folded paper had been pinned there with a small knife. Nathaniel opened the door and stepped out. Clara came behind him despite his quick glance of warning. He pulled the knife free and unfolded the paper. By lantern light, Clara read the words written in thick black ink. "Ask him about the blue ribbon." Nathaniel went still. Clara looked at him. The bundle of his letters in her room was tied with blue cloth, but from the look on Nathaniel's face, this message was not meant for her. It belonged to Abigail. And whatever secret had been buried with her was beginning to rise. Nathaniel did not speak for so long that Clara could hear the prairie breathing. The lantern flame bent in the wind. The paper trembled in his hand, though his face had gone so still it looked carved from the same weathered wood as the porch rail. "Ask him about the blue ribbon." Clara read the words again, and a chill passed through her that had nothing to do with the night air. "Nathaniel," she said softly, "what blue ribbon?" His eyes stayed on the paper. For a moment, she thought he might fold the truth back inside himself and lock it away the way lonely men sometimes did with grief. But then he lowered the note and looked toward the dark pasture, where the cattle had finally quieted. "Abigail wore one," he said. "A blue ribbon at her throat, not fancy, just a strip of cloth from her mother's dress." Clara thought of her own bundle of letters tied with blue cloth in the spare room. Something in her chest tightened. She wore it the day she died. Nathaniel nodded. They found her without it. The words landed heavy between them. The wind moved across the yard. Somewhere in the barn, a horse shifted and knocked a hoof against wood. Clara wrapped her arms around herself. Why would that matter? "Because Abigail never took it off," Nathaniel said. "Not once after she came here. She said it made her feel like someone from home was standing near." He looked at the note again. "I told the sheriff it was missing. He said the creek must have taken it." "But you did not believe that." "No." "Did Crow know about it?" Nathaniel's jaw tightened. Everybody did. It was hard not to notice. Clara looked toward the road where Crow had disappeared. Then this note could be a threat. Or a warning. From whom? Nathaniel folded the paper slowly. "That is what troubles me." They went back inside, but the house no longer felt like shelter. It felt as if the walls had ears. Nathaniel placed the note on the kitchen table beside the lantern. Clara sat across from him, watching his face. He had spent years carrying a sorrow that had never been allowed to become truth. Now someone had touched the old wound with a dirty hand. Who else was here when Abigail died? Clara asked. Nathaniel looked at her. At the ranch. In town around her. Anyone who might know more than they said. He rubbed one hand over his mouth, thinking. Sheriff Dobbins was new then. He took Crow's word more than mine. Pastor Hale buried her. Mrs. Vale at the Mercantile saw Abigail the morning she rode out. Caleb was only 14, working part days for me, and there was a drifter named Amos Bell who vanished the same week. Vanished. Worked for Crow sometimes. Hauled supplies. Slept in the old livery when he had money and under wagons when he did not. People said he moved on. Clara touched the edge of the note without picking it up. And now someone wants you to remember the ribbon. Nathaniel's eyes lifted to hers. I have never stopped remembering. The pain in his voice was quiet enough to break her heart. Clara had spent her life sewing torn fabric back together, but she knew some tears were not in cloth. Some were in a person's days, cut so deep that no hand could mend them quickly. Still, she also knew this. A loose thread, if followed carefully, could open a hidden seam. The next morning came bright and hard, as if the night had not been full of ghosts. Clara woke before dawn to the sound of Nathaniel moving in the kitchen. For a moment, she forgot where she was. Then the room, the quilt, the prairie light at the window, and the fear from the night before all returned. She dressed in her plain brown work dress, pinned her hair tight, and folded Nathaniel's mother's quilt with care. When she entered the kitchen, Nathaniel looked surprised. "You should sleep longer," he said. "I slept enough. I am riding into town." "I know." He set the coffee pot down. "Clara, I am going with you." His expression closed. "No." She poured herself coffee as if he had agreed. "Yes. Crow wants attention. If I bring you into town today, he will make sure every eye turns on you." "They already turned yesterday." "That is different." "No," she said, meeting his eyes. "Yesterday they looked at me as a mail-order bride. Today they may look at me as someone who asks questions. I prefer the second." Nathaniel stared at her, then looked down at his coffee with the tired defeat of a man losing an argument he had not prepared for. "Stay near me," he said. "I did not plan to wander off and join Crow for tea." Despite himself, Nathaniel gave a low breath that was almost laughter. By mid-morning they rode into Cedar Ridge. The town looked sharper in daylight. Dust lay thick in the wagon tracks. A hammer rang from the blacksmith shop. A woman shook rugs from a balcony above the hotel. The American flag outside the sheriff's office snapped in the wind. And just as Nathaniel had warned, people watched. Clara felt their eyes but did not lower her head. At the Mercantile, Mrs. Vale stood behind the counter arranging cans of peaches in a row so straight they seemed afraid of her. She was a thin woman in her 50s with silver hair, a tight collar, and eyes that missed nothing. Nathaniel removed his hat. "Morning, Mrs. Vale." Her gaze moved from him to Clara. "Mr. Reed, Miss Whitcomb." So the town already knew her name. Clara stepped forward. "Good morning." Mrs. Vale looked her up and down, not cruelly but carefully. "You came a long way." "Yes, ma'am. Most women do not." "I am not most women." A faint lift touched Mrs. Vale's brow. Nathaniel placed the folded note on the counter. "This was left at my door last night." Mrs. Vale read it. The color left her face. Clara noticed before Nathaniel did. "You know something," Clara said. Mrs. Vale folded the paper once, then unfolded it again with stiff fingers. "I know that some matters should stay buried." Nathaniel's voice hardened. "Abigail is buried, the truth is not." Mrs. Vale looked toward the store window, where two boys outside suddenly found interest in a barrel of nails. Then she lowered her voice. "The morning Abigail died, she came here." Nathaniel went still. "You told me she bought thread." "She did." "What else?" Mrs. Vale swallowed. She was frightened. The whole store seemed to quiet. "She asked for blue ribbon," Mrs. Vale continued. "Said hers had torn. I told her I had no matching shade. Then she asked if I had seen Amos Bell. I said no. That was the truth then." "And later?" Clara asked. Mrs. Vale's eyes moved to her. "Later that same afternoon, I saw Amos behind Crow's stable. He had a blue ribbon tied around his wrist." Nathaniel's hand struck the counter hard enough to rattle the cans. Mrs. Vale flinched. "You never told me," he said. "I was afraid." "Of Crow?" "Of what men like him can do when a widow owns a store with no sons to stand in the doorway," she snapped, and for the first time her hard face cracked. Clara's anger softened, but only slightly. Fear had kept many people silent. That did not make silence harmless. "What happened to Amos?" Clara asked. Mrs. Vale shook her head. "Gone by morning. But 2 weeks ago, a peddler passing through said he saw a man like Amos near Fort Pierre, sick, half-blind in one eye, begging outside a saloon." Nathaniel turned toward the door. Clara caught his sleeve. "Not alone," she said. He looked at her hand on his arm. Something passed between them, quick and warm even under the weight of danger. At that very moment the Mercantile door opened. Silas Crow stepped inside. He smiled when he saw them gathered around the counter. "Well," he said, "a morning meeting. I hope I was invited." Mrs. Vale went rigid. Nathaniel moved slightly in front of Clara, but she stepped just enough to stand beside him instead. Crow's eyes dropped to the note on the counter. His smile thinned. "That old story again," he said. "Careful, Reed. A man can lose the present by digging too hard in the past." Clara looked straight at him. "And a guilty man can lose sleep when the past starts digging back." For the first time, Crow's smile disappeared. If you believe one act of courage can change a life, don't forget to like this story and stay with Clara, because the secret tied to that blue ribbon was about to pull the whole town into the light. Crow stepped closer to the counter. Nathaniel's hand lowered near his side, but he did not reach for a weapon. Clara noticed something then, a thin scar across Crow's right wrist, and beneath his cuff, just for one breath, a faded thread of blue caught the light. The blue thread under Sela's Crow's cuff was only visible for a breath. Then he pulled his sleeve down, but Clara had seen it. Nathaniel had seen her see it. The air in Mrs. Vale's mercantile tightened until even the old floorboards seemed afraid to creak. Crow's eyes moved from Clara's face to Nathaniel's hand, then back again. The smile returned slowly, but it was not smooth now. It had a crack in it. "You Eastern women learn quick," he said, staring at a man's sleeve as if it carries a confession. Clara did not look away. Sometimes small things speak louder than men. Mrs. Vale gripped the counter with both hands. Nathaniel's voice was calm, but Clara heard the iron beneath it. "Show your wrist." Crow gave a short laugh. "You do not command me in a public store." "No," Nathaniel said, "but you came in here speaking like a man with nothing to hide." Crow stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Careful, Reed. You already lost one woman to your stubbornness. Would be ashamed to make the same mistake twice." Nathaniel's face changed. For one dangerous second, Clara thought grief would turn into action. She touched his arm, not to hold him back like a frightened woman, to remind him he was not alone. Nathaniel breathed once, slow and hard. Crow saw the gesture. His gaze sharpened with dislike, as if Clara's quiet steadiness bothered him more than any shouted accusation. "You will find no justice here," Crow said. "Only dust, gossip, and old sorrow." Then he tipped his hat and walked out. No one moved until his boots faded from the boardwalk. Mrs. Vale sank onto a stool behind the counter. "Lord help us." Nathaniel turned to her. "How long has he had that thread?" "I do not know." Clara looked through the window. Crow was crossing the street toward the sheriff's office now, walking like a man who wanted to arrive first. "He is going to shape the story before we can," she said. Nathaniel followed her gaze. "Then we do not give him the only voice." They left the mercantile at once. Sheriff Dobbins was outside his office when they crossed the road. He was a heavy man with tired eyes and a mustache that drooped at both ends. Crow stood beside him, speaking low. When Nathaniel and Clara approached, the sheriff looked as if he had been handed a problem before breakfast and blamed them for it. "Reed," he said. Nathaniel held up the note. "This was left at my house last night. Someone cut my south gate yesterday. Mrs. Vale has information about Abigail Stone." The sheriff's eyes flicked to Clara. "And Miss Whitcomb is part of this how?" "She saw Crow wearing blue thread under his cuff," Nathaniel said. Crow laughed coldly. "A bit of cloth now makes a murderer." "No one said murderer," Clara replied. Crow's eyes narrowed. Sheriff Dobbins sighed. "Miss Whitcomb, you are new here. Folks sometimes see meaning where grief has already dug the hole." Clara stepped forward. Dust brushed the hem of her dress. "Sheriff, I may be new to Cedar Ridge, but I am not new to men who use calm voices to hide fear." The sheriff looked uncomfortable. Nathaniel almost smiled, but the moment was too tense for it. Crow's face hardened. "You should teach your woman manners, Reed." Clara answered before Nathaniel could. "I am not his woman to teach. And if manners mean staying silent while a dead woman's name is used like a fence post, then I will do without them." A few townspeople had gathered now. The blacksmith stood at his doorway. Two women paused outside the hotel. Caleb had ridden in and stopped near the hitching rail, his young face pale but watchful. Sheriff Dobbins looked around and lowered his voice. "Enough. I will ask questions. That is all I can promise." "Ask Amos Bell," Clara said. Crow's head turned too quickly. There it was, a small mistake. Nathaniel caught it too. The sheriff frowned. "Amos Bell left 3 years ago." "Maybe," Clara said. "Or maybe he is still alive near Fort Pierre." Crow laughed again, but this time the sound came late. "A drunk drifter's word against mine. That is what you are building." Nathaniel looked at the sheriff. "Then send a wire." "To whom?" "The marshal's office at Fort Pierre. Ask if Amos Bell is there." Sheriff Dobbins rubbed his jaw. He did not want to do it. Everyone could see that. But everyone had also heard. At last he nodded. "I will send the wire." Crow's smile vanished completely. By sunset, Cedar Ridge had changed. The town still looked the same. Dust still moved down the street. Horses still stamped near hitching posts. The church bell still rang 6 times, but people were talking differently now. Not loudly, not bravely, just differently. Clara and Nathaniel returned to Red Creek Ranch under a sky streaked with fire. Neither spoke for the first few miles. The wagon wheels groaned. Judge, who had come into town in the back of the wagon like a suspicious judge at trial, rested his chin on his paws and watched the road behind them. At last, Nathaniel said, "You should not have stood against Crow like that." Clara looked at him. "Do you mean because it was dangerous, or because I did it well?" He glanced at her, then looked back at the road. "Both." A quiet smile touched her mouth, then it faded. "He fears Amos," she said. "Yes." "And he fears the ribbon." Nathaniel's hands tightened on the reins. "If Amos saw what happened to Abigail, I need to know." "You will." He shook his head. "I have told myself that before." Clara heard the weariness in him. Years of locked doors. Years of being told to move on. Years of carrying a woman's memory while everyone else treated it as finished business. She looked at the land ahead, where Red Creek Ranch sat in the distance with smoke rising from the chimney Caleb had lit before them. "Nathaniel," she said softly, "truth does not die because people bury it. Sometimes it only waits for someone willing to dig." He did not answer, but his eyes shone in the low light. That night after supper, Caleb brought in a small wooden box from the bunkhouse. "I should have said this before," the boy murmured. Nathaniel looked up. "Said what?" Caleb set the box on the table. His hands shook. "I was 14 when Miss Abigail died. I found this near the creek 2 days after." He swallowed hard. "I kept it because I was scared. Mr. Crow came around asking if anybody found anything. Said some things were better left to men. I was just a boy." Nathaniel opened the box. Inside lay a rusted button, a torn strip of paper stained by old rain, and a small piece of blue ribbon. Clara's breath caught. Nathaniel touched the ribbon with 2 fingers as if it might break. The torn paper showed only part of a sentence. "Crow met the survey man at dusk. The South Line papers are false. I have proof hidden in." The rest was gone. Nathaniel closed his eyes. Clara looked at the scrap, then at Caleb. "Hidden where?" she whispered. Caleb shook his head. "I do not know, ma'am." Nathaniel opened his eyes, and the grief in them had sharpened into purpose. But before anyone could speak, Judge rose from the floor with a deep growl. Outside, a horse galloped hard toward the house. A rider shouted from the dark, "Nathaniel Reed, fire at the barn." The shout split the night open. Nathaniel was out of his chair before the wooden box stopped shaking on the table. Clara snatched the lantern from beside the stove and followed him to the porch, her heart already pounding against her ribs. The barn glowed orange at the far corner, not fully burning yet but close enough. A line of fire crawled up the dry hay stacked near the side wall, licking at the boards like it had been waiting there. Smoke rolled low across the yard. The horses inside screamed and kicked against their stalls. Caleb ran past Clara with a bucket in each hand. Nathaniel grabbed another from the porch. "Well, water now." Clara did not wait to be told twice. She raced to the pump, the cold handle biting into her palms as she worked it hard. Water spilled into the bucket, splashing her skirt and boots. Caleb hauled the first 2 buckets toward the barn while Nathaniel threw open the big doors. Smoke burst out. Mercy reared inside, wild with fear. "Easy, girl," Nathaniel shouted, disappearing into the smoke. Clara's breath caught. "Nathaniel." There was no answer, only coughing, hooves striking wood, and the awful crackle of flame. She filled another bucket and ran toward the barn. Heat pushed against her face. Her eyes watered. Caleb threw water along the burning hay, but the fire kept climbing. Then Nathaniel came out leading Mercy, his sleeve smoking near the cuff. The mare's eyes rolled white, but he held firm. He passed the reins to Clara. "Take her to the north fence." "I can help here." "Clara, take her." This time she obeyed because the horse was trembling so badly she feared it might break loose. She led Mercy across the yard, speaking low, nonsense words, soft words, anything to keep the mare moving. Behind her, Nathaniel plunged back into the barn. One horse, then another, then the milk cow, bawling and stubborn. Judge ran in circles near the porch, barking until his old voice cracked. The rider who had brought the warning turned out to be Tom Arlen, a neighboring rancher. He joined Caleb at the pump, and together they formed a desperate line. Clara ran between the well and the barn until her arms shook and her lungs burned. At last the fire began to weaken. The hay was ruined. One corner of the barn was blackened. The smell of smoke clung to everything, but the barn still stood. And every animal was alive. Nathaniel stood in the yard, coughing into his sleeve, his face dark with soot. Clara hurried to him. "Your arm," she said. "It is nothing." "It is smoking." He looked down as if surprised to find his sleeve singed. Clara took his hand and pulled him toward the porch. He resisted for only a second, then followed. In the kitchen, she cut away the burned cloth with her sewing scissors. The skin beneath was red, painful, but not deep. "You call this nothing," she said. "I have had worse." "That is not an answer. That is a bad habit." He looked at her then, tired and soot-covered, and despite everything, his mouth softened. She cleaned the burn with cool water and wrapped it with clean linen from her trunk. Her hands were steady, but inside she was shaking. She had almost watched the barn take him, and that frightened her more than she wanted him to know. Caleb stepped into the doorway, pale under the smoke on his face. "Found this by the hay stack," he said. He held out a broken bottle. The rag stuffed in its mouth was charred black. Nathaniel's eyes hardened. "Coal oil," Tom Arlen muttered from behind him. "That was no accident." No one needed to say Crow's name. It was already in the room. Nathaniel stood, but Clara caught his wrist. "Do not ride out angry." He looked down at her hand. "If I let this pass, he will keep coming. If you ride to him now, he gets what he wants. A fight he can twist into proof that you are dangerous." Nathaniel's face tightened. "And if I do nothing?" "You are not doing nothing." Clara nodded toward the table where the wooden box still sat open. "You have Abigail's ribbon. You have the note. You have the sheriff sending a wire. You have witnesses to this fire. And you have me." The last words came out before she could pull them back. Nathaniel's gaze lifted to hers. For one quiet moment, the smoke, the fear, the burned barn, all of it seemed to fall away. Clara felt the weight of what she had said, not as a promise of marriage, not yet, but as something almost as serious, a choosing. Tom cleared his throat and looked away. Caleb suddenly found great interest in his boots. Nathaniel's voice dropped. "Yes," he said, "I do." The next day, Cedar Ridge woke to news of the fire. By noon, half the town had heard that Red Creek Ranch had nearly burned. By afternoon, people had also heard about the blue ribbon, the missing note, and the possibility that Amos Bell was alive. Fear still lived in Cedar Ridge, but now curiosity had joined it, and curiosity was harder for Silas Crow to control. Sheriff Dobbins came to the ranch just after sundown with a telegram folded in his hand. His face was serious in a way Clara had not seen before. Nathaniel met him in the yard. "Well?" he asked. The sheriff took off his hat. "Marshal at Fort Pierce says they found a man answering Amos Bell's description. Half blind in one eye. Sick. Says he will talk, but only to Nathaniel Reed." Nathaniel went still. Clara felt the ground shift beneath the story. "When?" she asked. Soon as you can ride, the sheriff said, but there is more. What? He handed Nathaniel the telegram. Nathaniel read it once, then again. Clara saw his face lose color. What is it? She asked. He passed her the paper. The final line read: Bell claims Abigail Stone hid the proof inside Reed's own house. Clara looked toward the ranch house, its windows glowing softly in the evening light. The secret they had been chasing across town, and memory had been close enough to touch all along. Somewhere inside those walls, Abigail's final truth was waiting. Clara stood in the yard with the telegram in her hand, staring at the house as if it had become a stranger. The windows glowed warm. Smoke rose from the chimney. Judge lay on the porch with his head on his paws, watching them through tired eyes. Everything looked ordinary. That made the message worse. Abigail Stone hid the proof inside Reed's own house. Nathaniel walked past Clara without speaking. He climbed the porch steps and opened the door, but then he stopped just inside, one hand resting against the wall. For years he had lived among these rooms. He had sat at that kitchen table. He had built fires in that hearth. He had walked through the hallway in winter darkness and summer heat, carrying grief like another piece of furniture. And all that time, Abigail's truth may have been hidden near him. Clara followed him in slowly. Sheriff Dobbins came behind them, hat in his hands. Caleb stayed at the door, looking pale and frightened. Tom Arlen waited outside with the horses, keeping watch. Nathaniel turned in the kitchen, his face full of pain. I searched after she died, he said. Every drawer, every trunk, every place I thought she might have put something. Clara set the telegram on the table. Then we think where a frightened woman would hide something from a man who knew this ranch. Nathaniel looked at her. Crow knew the barn, she said. He knew the fence lines. He knew enough to cut the south gate. If Abigail had proof against him, she would not hide it anywhere obvious. Sheriff Dobbins cleared his throat. Marshall says Amos is weak. We may not have long to get his full statement. Then we search tonight, Nathaniel said. They began with the kitchen. Clara opened cupboards while Nathaniel checked beneath loose boards near the stove. The sheriff searched the pantry. Caleb brought lanterns from the barn, his hands still shaking from the fire the night before. Every small sound felt too loud. A drawer scraping open. A chair moved across the floor, the wind pressing against the windows. Clara found old receipts, a cracked button, 3 rusted nails, and a paper of dried beans. Nathaniel found nothing under the floorboards but dust and a long dead mouse. They moved to the main room. The chair Clara had noticed on her first day sat near the hearth. Nathaniel lifted it, turned it over, ran his hands along the underside. Nothing. He checked behind the bookcase, inside hollow curtain rods under the hearthstone. Nothing. Hours passed. The house grew colder. At midnight, Sheriff Dobbins rubbed his eyes and said, Maybe Bell is lying. Drifters say things for attention. Nathaniel's face darkened. Clara stood near the fireplace, holding Abigail's small piece of blue ribbon between her fingers. No, she said. The men looked at her. She was trying to warn you, Clara said to Nathaniel. She was not thinking like a rancher or a sheriff. She was thinking like a woman who knew she might not be believed. Her eyes moved slowly around the room. She would hide it somewhere another woman might understand. The words came out before Clara knew exactly what they meant. Then she remembered the quilt, Nathaniel's mother's quilt, the one folded at the foot of her bed, a woman's stitches, a safe place, a place men might overlook because it looked like comfort, not evidence. Clara turned and walked quickly down the hall to the spare room. Nathaniel followed. The quilt lay folded neatly where she had placed it that morning, blue and white, faded soft, stitched by a mother's hands. Clara lifted it onto the bed and ran her fingers over the seams. At first there was nothing. Then she found it. One patch near the lower corner felt thicker than the others. Her heart began to pound. Nathaniel, she whispered. He stood beside her, silent. Clara took out her sewing scissors, the same silver scissors she had carried from St. Louis, and carefully opened the hidden seam. The thread was old, but not as old as the quilt. Someone else had restitched it. Inside was a folded oilskin packet. Nathaniel stopped breathing. Clara lifted it free and placed it in his hands. For a long moment he could not open it, so she did. Inside were 3 papers, a copy of a land survey, a signed statement from a surveyor admitting Silas Crowe had paid him to falsify the south boundary, and a letter written in Abigail Stone's hand. Nathaniel sank onto the edge of the bed as if his legs had failed him. Clara held the letter under the lantern light and read softly, "Nathaniel, if this reaches you, then I was too afraid to say it plain while looking at your face. Crowe has lied about the South Line. I saw the papers. Amos helped carry them and told me where they were kept. I am riding to town to find Sheriff Dobbins before Crowe knows I have proof. If I do not return, do not let them call it weather. Do not blame yourself for not seeing what I tried to hide. You have a good heart, Nathaniel Reed, but you carry sorrow like it is your duty. It is not. Live past this. Love past this if God gives you the chance. Abigail." Nathaniel covered his face with one hand. No one spoke. Clara folded the letter with great care. She felt tears burning behind her eyes, not only for Abigail, but for the man sitting on the bed beside a truth that had waited 3 years to forgive him. Sheriff Dobbins stood in the doorway, pale. "I should have listened," he said. Nathaniel lowered his hand. "Yes, you should have." The sheriff took the words without argument. "We can reopen the claim," he said. "With this and Amos Bell's statement, Crowe cannot bury it." "Only if Amos lives long enough to speak," Clara said. Nathaniel looked at her. There was no need to discuss it. By dawn, they were riding for Fort Pierre. If you have stayed with Clara and Nathaniel this far, tell me in the comments what you think Abigail's final letter means. Was it only proof, or was it also her way of giving Nathaniel permission to live again? The ride north was hard. Clara rode Sunday beside Nathaniel, her coat pulled tight against the wind. Sheriff Dobbins came with them, along with Tom Arlen and Caleb. They carried the papers inside Nathaniel's coat, wrapped in oilskin and tied with Abigail's blue ribbon. For 2 days, they crossed open land, slept little and spoke less. On the second evening, they reached Fort Pierre under a sky bruised purple with coming rain. The marshal met them outside a low wooden jailhouse. His face told the answer before his mouth did. "Bell is alive," he said, "but weak." Inside, Amos Bell lay on a narrow cot, thin as a fence rail, one eye clouded white, the other sharp with old fear. He looked at Nathaniel and began to cry before anyone said his name. "I didn't push her," Amos whispered. "God help me, I didn't push her." Nathaniel stood still. Clara felt his pain beside her like heat. Amos gripped the blanket with bony fingers. "Crowe took the ribbon," he said. "He took it after she fell, said it would remind Reed what happens when people reach above their place." Nathaniel's hand curled into a fist. Clara stepped closer to him, her shoulder almost touching his arm. Amos looked at her then, confused. "You're not Abigail." "No," Clara said softly. "But I am here to hear the truth." Amos swallowed hard. "Then hear it," he whispered. "Crowe did not mean to kill her at first. He meant to scare her, but she would not give him the papers. She ran toward the creek. He grabbed her horse's bridle. The animal reared. She fell. The water was high." His voice broke. "I wanted to help. Crowe held me back, said if I spoke I'd be next." Nathaniel closed his eyes. The room felt as if every breath had become a prayer. Then Amos raised one shaking hand toward Nathaniel. "She hid the papers before she rode out. Said if she did not come back, truth would find its way home." Nathaniel opened his eyes. For the first time since Clara had known him, the grief in them did not look trapped. It looked like it had found a door. But before Amos could sign the statement, shouting erupted outside the jailhouse. A horse screamed. Men yelled. The marshal rushed to the window. Clara turned just in time to see Silas Crowe step down from a black horse in the muddy street, his coat snapping in the wind and his hand raised toward the jailhouse door. He had followed them to Fort Pierre. Silas Crowe stood in the muddy street like a man who believed the world still owed him room. Rain had begun to fall, not heavy yet, but sharp enough to darken his coat and shine on the brim of his black hat. 2 men sat mounted behind him, both hard-faced, both pretending their hands were nowhere near their guns. The people of Fort Pierre had stopped where they stood, watching from porches, saloon doors, and shop fronts. Inside the jailhouse, Amos Bell began to shake. "He'll kill me," Amos whispered. "He said he would." Nathaniel stepped toward the door. Clara caught his sleeve, not with anger. His eyes burned when he looked at her. "He stood by while Abigail died." "Yes," Clara said, her voice low. "And if you walk out there like a grieving man instead of a truthful one, he will use that too." The marshal moved to the door with his rifle in hand. Sheriff Dobbins stood beside him, pale but steady now, as if shame had finally grown a backbone inside him. Crow called from outside, "Reed, come out and face me like a man." Nathaniel's jaw tightened. Clara walked to the table where the papers lay wrapped in oilskin. She picked up Abigail's letter, the false survey, and the unsigned statement the marshal had begun to write from Amos's words. Then she turned to Amos. "Can you sign?" His one good eye filled with terror. "If I sign, I'm dead." "If you do not sign," Clara said gently, "then Abigail stays alone in that creek forever." Amos closed his eye. The words hurt him, she saw it. But sometimes truth had to hurt before it healed. Nathaniel knelt beside the cot. "I hated you for 3 years," he said quietly. "I do not know if that will leave me today, but tell the truth now, and I will stand between Crow and you as long as I have breath." Amos stared at him. The room held still. Then the broken man reached for the pen. His hand shook so badly Clara had to hold the paper flat. Amos Bell signed his name in crooked letters, each stroke weak but real. The marshal took the paper and blew gently on the ink. Outside, Crow shouted again, "You hiding behind a woman now, Reed?" Clara looked at Nathaniel. He took Abigail's blue ribbon from the oilskin packet and wrapped it once around the papers. Then he opened the door. Rain blew into the jailhouse. Nathaniel stepped onto the wooden porch with Clara at his side, Sheriff Dobbins and the marshal behind them. Crow smiled when he saw them. "There she is," he said, looking at Clara. "The seamstress who thinks she can stitch a dead woman back into court." Clara lifted the papers. "No," she said clearly, "but I can stitch together what you tore apart." A murmur moved through the crowd. Crow's smile twitched. Nathaniel spoke next, his voice carrying across the muddy street. "Amos Bell has given a signed statement. Abigail's papers were found in my house. The false survey is here. Your paid man's confession is here." Crow's face hardened. "Lies." Sheriff Dobbins stepped forward. "Then you can answer them before a judge." For the first time, Crow looked at the sheriff with true disbelief. "You," he said, "you old coward." Dobbins flinched, but he did not step back. "Yes," he said, "I was not today." Crow's hand moved, not fast enough. The marshal raised his rifle. Crow's 2 men froze as half the street drew breath at once. "Do not finish that mistake," the marshal said. Crow looked from the rifle to the crowd, then to Nathaniel. Rain ran down his face now, making him look less polished, less certain, more like the small, greedy man beneath the fine coat. "You think this ends me?" Crow said. "Land papers, a dead girl's letter, a drunk's shaking hand." Nathaniel's voice was quiet. "No, your own fear ended you. We only followed the trail." Crow lunged then, not with a gun, but toward Clara and the papers. Nathaniel stepped in front of her. The marshal and Sheriff Dobbins seized Crow before he could reach them. He fought hard, cursing, boots slipping in the mud, but the crowd had seen enough. Even his own men backed away. The handcuffs closed around his wrists. As the marshal dragged him toward the jailhouse, something slipped from Crow's sleeve and fell into the mud. A faded blue ribbon. Old, stained, but still bright enough to be seen. The whole street went silent. Nathaniel bent slowly and picked it up. Clara watched his face. Pain passed through him, but it no longer ruled him. He held the ribbon like a farewell that had waited 3 years to be spoken. That evening, after Crow was locked in a cell and Amos Bell's statement was sealed, Nathaniel walked with Clara to the edge of town. The rain had stopped. The clouds broke low in the west and gold light spilled across the wet street. "I thought finding the truth would bring peace," Nathaniel said. "Maybe peace comes later," Clara said. After the heart believes what the mind already knows. He looked at her. You speak like someone who has had to convince herself of that. I have. They stood beneath the dripping eaves of a closed shop. Horses shifted nearby. Somewhere behind them, a woman began singing softly to a child. Nathaniel unfolded Abigail's letter one last time, then tied the recovered ribbon around it. She told me to live past this, he said. Clara's voice softened. Then maybe the best way to honor her is to do it. His eyes met hers, full of grief, gratitude, and something more tender than either. I do not want to ask you anything while sorrow is still standing between us, he said. Clara felt her breath catch. Then do not ask tonight, she whispered, but do not stop walking beside me. Nathaniel reached for her hand. This time he did not let go quickly. And as the last light touched the wet boards beneath their feet, Clara knew the truth had not only freed Abigail's memory, it had opened the door to whatever love might come next. By the time Clara and Nathaniel returned to Cedar Ridge, the town already knew. News rode faster than wagons on the frontier. It slipped through telegraph wires, crossed counters, passed from porch to porch, and by sunset every soul in Cedar Ridge had heard that Silas Crow had been arrested in Fort Pierre with Abigail Stone's ribbon hidden in his sleeve. For once, no one laughed at Nathaniel Reed. No one told him to let the past rest. No one called Abigail's death whether bad luck or sorrow making a man imagine things. The truth had come home. Nathaniel drove the wagon slowly down the main street with Clara beside him. People watched from the boardwalks, but this time their staring felt different. Some looked ashamed. Some lowered their eyes. Mrs. Vale stood outside the mercantile with one hand pressed to her chest. Sheriff Dobbins walked behind the wagon, carrying the sealed papers like a man carrying the weight of every year he had stayed silent. At Red Creek Ranch, the evening light spread soft and golden over the burned corner of the barn. Caleb had patched what he could. Judge limped down the porch steps to greet them, sniffed Clara's skirt, then leaned his old head against her leg as if he had decided she was no longer a visitor. Nathaniel noticed. "He trusts you," he said. Clara looked down and touched the dog's gray muzzle. "Maybe he knows I plan to stay a while." Nathaniel went still. The words had come gently, but they filled the yard. Clara did not take them back. For a long moment the only sound was the wind moving through the grass. Then Nathaniel stepped closer. "I have no fine speech ready," he said. "I did not come west for fine speeches." "I know," his voice shook slightly. "That is why I can say this plain." He took his mother's gold ring from his vest pocket, the same ring he had not dared show her before the truth was found. "Clara Whitcomb, I asked for a woman who believed in truth. God sent me one brave enough to stand beside it. I do not ask you to fill Abigail's place. No one can. I ask you to make your own place here, if your heart is willing." Clara looked at the ring, then at his face. She saw grief there still. She knew it would not vanish in a day, but she also saw room for mourning, room for laughter, room for a life built slowly, honestly, one board and one promise at a time. "Yes," she whispered, "my heart is willing." They were married 2 weeks later in the small white church at Cedar Ridge. The pews were fuller than Nathaniel expected. Mrs. Vale brought flowers. Caleb stood as witness with his hair combed too flat. Sheriff Dobbins came and sat in the back, quiet and humbled. Tom Arlen cried openly and blamed the dust. Nathaniel placed the ring on Clara's finger with hands that had known work, loss, and patience. Clara looked at him and smiled through tears. Outside, the prairie shone bright under a clear sky. In the years that followed, Red Creek Ranch changed. The burned barn was rebuilt stronger. The south pasture was legally restored. Crow's false claim was struck down in court, and his name, once feared, became a warning people spoke in low voices. But the greatest change was inside the house. Clara turned the spare room into a sewing room where morning light came through the window. She mended shirts, wedding dresses, children's coats, and sometimes broken hearts when women came to her with troubles they could not say anywhere else. Nathaniel learned to laugh again, not loudly, not often at first, but enough. and every spring they rode to the creek crossing and tied a fresh blue ribbon to the fence post there. Not as a wound, as a promise. Abigail Stone was not forgotten. She became part of the truth that saved them. Years later, when Clara's hair had silver in it and Nathaniel's hands shook slightly when he poured coffee, people would still ask how she had dared answer a stranger's notice in a newspaper. Clara would smile and look toward the prairie. "I did not answer a notice," she would say. "I answered the truth inside it." And on quiet evenings, when the sun lowered over Red Creek Ranch, Nathaniel would sit beside her on the porch, their hands resting close, Judge's old collar hanging by the door, and the wind moving softly through the grass. Clara had crossed the frontier afraid that the man waiting at the end might not be real, but he had been, and in the end, that was the greatest love she had ever found. If this story touched your heart, subscribe for more emotional Wild West stories where love, pain, and truth meet on the frontier.